Okay, just a summary slide here. A little bit of information you've already heard and a little bit of new information. So one of the things that you need to do, or that we say need to, I think need is probably the right word, and we'll get to how to do this in a second, is help the team get interviews. Remember, you have industry knowledge that the teams don't have. So we really need you to leverage that expertise and help them get some interviews that are applicable, that are the right kinds of customers, potential channel partners, and anybody that might be able to help them, advance their customer discovery. The other two, graphics on here, productively challenge the team's thinking. Again, asking them why, asking them how do you know that, asking if there are more fundamental assumptions that underlie an assumption that they said, oh, we heard that people need help with sales. It's like, okay, well, how did you figure out that they needed help with sales? They need a better diagnostic test. Good. What did they say that made you think they need a better diagnostic test? Whatever it is, you're really just trying to kind of, have them think for themselves and repeat to you. I always tell them, if you come back to me at the end of a session and you use the customer's words to answer questions that I might have for you, that is a giant win, right? It means they were listening. It means that they're really projecting voice of customer. So that's all part of challenging the team's thinking, but making sure that you're going pretty deep on, assumptions or false assumptions, or things that they might think they know, really get deeply into their thinking. And then, of course, we just, left a slide that said help them interpret what they're learning. Okay, so let's talk about helping the team get interviews. So this includes helping the team leverage their own connections, right? So I think that's part of a good mentor. You don't want to say, well, here's my phone, I did a quick export of it, or here's my laptop, and here are 100 people to go call. Don't get me wrong, that's very nice and kind of you, and I appreciate that. But I like to think of this, all of this, as a learning opportunity. So make sure that you're talking to the teams about who do they know, why do you think they're important, how might we get in contact with them, what's the best way to schedule those interviews, and again, those are things that you'll go through in the early days of the course. But still in all, challenging them to bring their own context to the table. Now, in this case, you can also leverage your own Rolodex and help them make new connections to help the team. I think that's fantastic. We want you to do that. We need you to do that. The reality is, 100 interviews in 7 weeks. The quick math of that is you've got, let's call it, 49 days. We'll round to 50 in a 7-week period. The reality is that's 2 a day. That's 2 unique interviews in person per day. It's quite the throughput. So you just have to move as quickly as you possibly can. And we'll talk about maybe how to ease in on the interviews in just a second. So what does challenge the team's thinking mean? It means forcing the entrepreneurial leads to think differently. And quite frankly, this is, again, what this entire mentor training is about. This and really the entire course, the national course, is about. This change in thinking is the biggest value that the teaching team and mentors can provide, to make them think very critically about really what is an assumption. How did I phrase that in such a way that I got the answer I wanted? Ooh, yeah, you phrased it in such a way you got the answer you wanted. That's bad. That is the very definition of confirmation bias. So making sure that you're asking questions and creating hypotheses that do not lead the witness. That is really the best thing that you could do. You're really creating better researchers and better learners. You're going to keep the whole team immersed in the process by constantly having the ELs question their own assumptions. And again, this is really a bridge from that first bullet, which is, your value is to change their thinking. If you're changing their thinking well enough, they will immediately correct themselves. And I will tell you, I'll admit it myself. If I'm going in a new project from time to time, I'll make that same mistake, but at least I say, no, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. That's too much confirmation bias. I've got to ask that more openly, right? I mean, over time, people will learn to correct themselves, but you can be doing that with them. And in these early days, these formative days of entrepreneurial leads, and creating good researchers and good thinkers, you are critical. Eventually, if they're immersed in this process and really learning the National I-Corps Teams program material and curriculum, you'll notice that the ELs will start to question their own assumptions. You'll hear it, and honestly, reinforce that and say, "Good for you. How did you get there?" Right? You're like, what made you think that was leading? What made you think that hypothesis was not testable? Why could the opposite not be true? Those are all techniques that you'll learn about in the program. But just making sure that the ELs are able to think on their own when you're not around. That's a critical piece of what you do. One of the examples, a way to do this, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, is asking why. Right? They might say, well, I just know that they have a problem in the lab with time and the time it takes to run this particular assay. And it's like, great. So why do you think that? Well, we heard X and Y and Z from a researcher. Well, why do you think that is? Why do you think that's true? Going a little deeper each and every time and really having them get to the more fundamental assumptions that are behind what they say, right? Because people want to answer, right? It's a natural human, reaction. You ask me a question, I want to answer. Instead, we want to get, as deeply into the root causes and the root, issues in what the customer said, in why the entrepreneurial leads, the ELs, are thinking in a certain way. And that asking why 5 times is not, it's not owned by us. That's a very common technique that I'm sure many of you have used over the time, over time. And the reality is that, come up with your own ways of asking that. I personally love the question, how do you know that? And just having people say, well, it's because I said, because the person that I was interviewing said X and Y and Z. And I said, well, are you sure that that's what they meant? How do you know that that's what they meant? Right? Why might they have said that? And really just, again, getting them deeply into, parsing out each and every word in responses from the people that are being interviewed. All right. So any questions here or so far? Anything? Okay. All right. What slide are we on, Evan? I cannot see it from this side. I think we're about halfway through. I think we're doing well on time.
All right, I have a question.
Yes, who is that?
This is Ted Eveleth. My video is not.
Oh, hello, Ted.
How you doing?
All right, how are you?
I'm okay. I raised my hand for a long time there, but clearly you can't see me.
I cannot see you, no, sir. Sorry, Ted.
The camera isn't functioning. So you talked about 100 customers.
Yes.
A customer is a very confusing thing in say an industrial sale of some product that's going to be, given to the patient by the nurse, and the pharmacy, the hospital pharmacy makes a decision about what it is, and somebody else makes a decision about what to buy. So are you liberal with your definition of customer?
So let me, I think you've hit on a very good point. I think and you'll learn this in the course, but I think one of the things that you're trying to do is, in the customer discovery process, right, there are the economic buyers, there are the influencers, there are the saboteurs, there are the beneficiaries, there are all kinds of customers in the customer buying process. So at the end of the day, we want as many real decision makers interviewed. But as you're going through your process, if you have a very complex sale that involves 5 different customer types, in your case, right? It's the OR nurse and the scheduling nurse. Oh, it's also the surgeon. It's also the anesthesiologist. Well, yes, we would want you to interview all 4 or 5 of those customer types during your process, if those are the customer types that you needed interviewed. So yes, and remember, this is just the beginning. So we say 100 plus. The reality is we want you to, come into, the final days with, let's just call it 120 interviews, right? So you got your 100 interviews, and in a certain way, and I don't mean this to be trite, but you've checked the box of doing real interviews with real customers. You've done, a really good job of listening and processing. But the reality is, Ted, that might be the very beginning of customer discovery for that particular product or service, given that there are so many people in that process, in that buying process. So just keep that in mind as well, that it really depends. If you have a more straightforward process where there's only, the economic buyer is the decision maker, is the influencer, is the beneficiary, well, then you should talk to 100 of that kind of person. In a more complex sales environment like the one that you just described, yes, we're gonna, now again, you should be able to spread the numbers a little quicker, because if you go to the person that you believe is the target buyer, the person that's in the most pain, the person that is the decision maker that says, I need this and I will absolutely talk to everyone in my organization to make sure this happens, the next question you're going to ask is, great, who are the other kinds of people in the organization that you need to go to when you're evaluating a product like this? And they're going to give you 4 or 5 other names like that, right in that interview. So you can leverage 1 into 4 immediately. So you should have no problem, I would hope. I mean, I obviously hope this for you and for all of our teams. You should have no problem getting to 130 or 140 in a case like that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, great question. And again, is it Elisa or Alyssa?
Yeah. Hi, Anthony. It's Elisa. Just another quick question.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I sure can.
Great. Just wondering, approximately what percentage of the interviews do the mentors typically attend alongside the companies?
Oh, that's a really great question. I'm going to defer to Shannon. She might actually have a better sense of the percentage of interviews that mentors attend.
I don't think there's a specific percentage that's allocated. I think it's more like each team kind of has to sort of figure out together what their strategy is going to be. The entrepreneurial lead is obviously responsible for getting the interviews for the team, and there's a lot of advice that the teams try and do interviews in pairs or groups, so that it's not always on the entrepreneurial lead's shoulders to do the interview, notice everything that's happening, take the notes, and then report back to their supporting team members that somebody's there to help them. So I think, but it's really not something where you have a certain expectation that's laid out for you. As often, I would say an easier way to think about it is as often as makes sense for you to participate. On the first 3 days, when you're there together in person, the whole team will go out together, and you'll get a chance to sort of set the tone. So you'll participate in those first 3 days. You're expected to go out and get 15 interviews in the city where the cohort is happening. So all 3 team members will be present for that. And then I think from there, or even before you go, kind of figuring out based on where they're going, what your schedules are, how you want to manage it, what you think the entrepreneurial lead needs, you'll, I think, come up with a plan on what makes the best sense for your team.
Great. Fantastic. Thanks.
Yeah, that was a great question. And the one thing that I want to add to that is we definitely don't want the mentors doing interviews without the ELs. That is for sure. The purpose is not to train the mentors. And as much as I will tell you, we've had mentors say it's like, I love it. I love the process. I love the customer discovery. That's fantastic. But the real job is to make sure that you're teaching a process to the ELs. So I think Shannon's point is absolutely perfect, which is, attend as many as is feasible and practical. Just make sure that that it's never a mentor without the ELs or the TLs. Okay, so we are all at any other questions before we move on?
Very quick. Form of interviews, I mean, it could be also by phone or in person.
Well, that's a great question. So you want to do as many in-person interviews as you can possibly get. So I will tell you, and I have heard the national instructors talk about this, to teams that say, well, can we do a phone interview? It is the least helpful interview for all sorts of reasons. You want to see their body language. You want to, be able to, gauge both their interest, the depth of the answer. You want to be able to immediately follow up. And I appreciate that, that a phone call is a live event, so to speak, but you want as many in-person interviews as you can get. And the one thing that the teams are going, that the instructors are going to challenge you to is, why can't you get to them? Remember, you have funds to be able to travel to the customer sites. So it's not just a volume game, it's a quality game. And the better quality interviews are done in person, 100%.
I agree. With doctors especially, there's this, but I thought about like calling about, well, we'll be doing brain imaging, we're calling Nora Volkov and talk about what would be useful for the drug, addiction. Well, probably I don't know if she can, see me in DC. Probably I'd rather call her. So I'm saying some cases would be very difficult.
Well, and that's fair. And again, I think, the one thing that I have seen personally is that the national instructors are pretty flexible when the reasoning is solid. When it's a matter of, I don't want to do that, or I can't do that, or, just something that's like, no, you can absolutely get there. We've had teams do that before, and here's the method. I think that's actually part of, again, what the national instructors will help you with. It's like, hey, we understand that it could be a problem. I actually coached a team, a team of surgeons about a year and a half ago. Wow. And the reality is that it was onerous to get in front of, and these were their colleagues. I mean, they couldn't get the first 30 interviews during the short course just because it was really hard to get other surgeons who they knew. They said, yes, boy, if we tried to go to a different hospital and do these interviews, it would have never happened. We said, well, there you go. You should also keep that in mind, that becomes really tough when you're actually going to be in market with a commercial product. But that's for another day. I know that the instructors get pretty are going to be pretty flexible, and they're going to help you figure out the best way to go about it.
Hi, can I ask a question along those lines? It's Heather.
Hello, Heather.
Hi. So how often do the teams successfully complete 100+ interviews? I mean, it does sound,
100% of the time.
Really?
Yes. If you can't complete 100 interviews in 7 weeks, you will lose your grant and be removed from the program if you're not going to make that pace. So 100% of the completing, and it's very rare that happens. It almost
But isn't
never
the grant
happens
only for the duration of the program?
No, the grant is for 6 months, but your goal, your 100 interviews have to be done in the 7
weeks.
You can keep using the money after that.
So are the teams going to come with a list of potential, or at least like target interview organizations or institutions, or?
Absolutely. That's definitely part of the strategy, is to work with them in advance to really develop a list, so that they don't have to figure that out from day one in person. If they've got a plan of attack kind of worked out.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, great question. And it sounds like a lot, and it is. Don't get me wrong, it absolutely is. But we make, even in our accelerator, which is a 14-week program, top to tail, so double. We have a minimum of 200, and we've never had anybody not get to it. And that's with a very small amount of money on the line. With the grants that the NSF is giving out, the reality is that it gets done. People find a way. All right. So any other questions before we move on? All right. So the last of the slides, a couple of slides ago, right? Help the team interpret what is being said. Again, helping the team identify and avoid confirmation bias. There is nothing that we're ever going to do to get the mentors or the ELs or the TLs to forget why they're there. They're never going to forget their product or service. They're never going to forget what they're trying to learn. But at the end of the day, you have to learn the process of getting rid of that confirmation bias, because 100 people that say, hey, I loved it, or wow, this is great. There should be no it. There should be no, something that is great. It should be a problem that people have articulated, 100+ times, that then guides your technology development. Again, this is related. You are going to help them create hypotheses and questions that do not lead the witness. They're going to be, again, very open-ended. They're going to be testable. They're going to be falsifiable. And we'll talk about an example it might even be the next slide. And then you're going to, again, help them analyze these interviews in the context of what they're learning in the I-Core course. So that, you will be given curriculum such that, what you're hearing from the interviews can be tied back to the curriculum. And that's part of your job, just making sure that they're going back to the slides, going back to the content, and really making sure that you're driving home the experiential learning that comes like nothing else you've ever seen when you're really doing good interviews with customers. It is amazing. And I will tell you, I have never worked with a team that didn't at the end of it, and I'm just talking about short courses. I mean, the national course then takes it to a whole other level. But between the short courses and what we have here as a long course, I have never worked with a team, never, that didn't get to the end and said, I am changed. I'm completely thinking differently. And that's the beauty of what you're providing as mentors. And I mean, it's incredibly powerful. So that wraps up the 3 first slide from a couple of slides ago. Any questions about the roles of mentors in that context?